I'm here today with Kate Rademacher, the author of a new book titled Reclaiming Rest, The Promise of Sabbath, Solitude, and Stillness in a Restless World. Kate works in international public health and is also the author of previous books, Their Faces Shown and Following the Red Bird. In recognition of Kate's leadership in global health, she is in the inaugural cohort of an organization called Women Lift Health, which is sponsored by Stanford University. She and her family live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and you can learn more about Kate at katerademacher.com. So Kate, as always, it's so wonderful to be able to spend some time with you today.
Thank you, Brian. You and everything you're doing, you're one of my favorite people, so I'm really honored to be here. So thank you.
Well, that obviously goes both ways. And, we've been able to collaborate together on several different things, which has just been really wonderful. So, but I'd love for you to talk to folks a little bit more about your background, since you've got this kind of bivocational, aspect of things, and you've got a serious day job. So can you tell us a little bit about all of that?
Yeah, sure. I love the word bivocational. It's kind of come to me just fairly recently. And as you mentioned, I work, in international public health. So I focus most of my work, almost all of my work is on expanding access to contraception in developing country contexts. So I work for a large NGO. Actually, our headquarters is here in Durham, North Carolina, and it's just been a fabulous place. Prior to that, I worked domestically. I'm a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill School of Public Health. So I really, I feel an incredible sense of vocation around that work. And I actually wrote about that in my first memoir. And then I have this kind of quirky, evolving faith life. So I was not raised as a Christian. And I found myself unexpectedly going through a conversion journey in my early 30s. And so I was baptized and confirmed in the Episcopal Church when I was in my mid 30s. And I'm married to a Buddhist, a guy who's very serious about his Buddhism. So I have kind of, like I said, a quirky faith background. And a couple weeks after I was baptized, I found myself speaking of the word restless, I found myself restless and ended up writing, feeling called to write. And so 3 books later, I have this kind of second vocation and as a writer, as a Christian writer. And you and the work you do through Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity have truly been incredibly helpful, supportive, just incredible resources for me, because as you know, it's confusing. It's hard to write, and then it's really confusing to know how to get your writing out there if you're a new writer. So I've been grateful to partner with you on a number of things.
So before we talk about books and stuff, I'd really like to hear more about Women Lift Health. What exactly is that?
Yeah, sure. So I was really honored to be nominated to the program about 1.5 years ago. We actually had to sort of take a small pause because of COVID-19, but it's a program that is designed to support women who are in global health as a career and are mid-career, they say, and to really help try to, I think, increase the number of women leaders in public health and global health specifically. And so I think it's really designed to say to sort of emerging leaders or leaders who are mid-career and sort of how to help them go to the next level. So it's been interesting. So it's included kind of some didactic training. It's included mentoring and coaching. And it's just been an incredible cohort of women. And actually, we started by talking about being bivocational. It's really been a place where I've been able to bring my whole self to the table. And I think that that's part actually of being a leader, is feeling more and more confident and ready to sort of step into all parts of yourself publicly and internally. And so actually the Women Lift cohort, I'm there ostensibly, of course, for my work in international public health, but I've been really talking about the release of Reclaiming Rest. And of course, here I have the book, I'll hold it up. It's coming out in June. And, the book is about issues of work-life balance, although I'm not really a big fan of that phrase. And of course, women in all different, working settings struggle often with that issue. And so I've also been able to bring the exploration of rest as a public health issue to my work through MinLift. I don't know if you know, we can talk more about this, but in 2019, the World Health Organization classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon for the first time ever. So there's just been a lot more emphasis and sort of exploration of the issue of professional burnout. Often it's focused on frontline healthcare workers, nurses, and doctors. But, you know, I know from my own work, and of course, I think the pandemic has made it clear, like to have public health, you have this whole infrastructure of health professionals, right? And so, and then of course, in other all sorts of industries, burnout is a major issue. So I think there's a lot more discussion about this topic in many domains. And so hopefully my book will be a timely contribution to that conversation.
Interesting. Well, congratulations on the Women Lift, health, program.
Thanks.
It's still fantastic that you're in that, and look forward to hearing more throughout your journey there. So
yeah, thanks.
So now let's talk about books. But before we get to the new one, talk to folks a little bit more about the first two that I mentioned that you wrote.
Sure. Well, I thought it's always good to have show and tell.
Of course,
and
absolutely.
You said that you wanted to see them. So this is the first one, Following the Red Bird. And actually both of my two books, Following the Red Bird and Their Faces Shown, were published by Light Messages Publishing, which is an independent press based out of North Carolina, and they're fabulous. And the first book, Following the Red Bird, is about kind of, again, my very unexpected conversion journey, but more than that, sort of the first year after my baptism and confirmation, and just sort of like, as I was really trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a Christian? How do I do this? I think actually being married to a Buddhist, there's so much emphasis on like how you do spirituality as a Buddhist. And so I think I really brought that mindset to my nascent Christianity, like, not just what do I believe, but what do I do about it? How do I act in the world? How do I think inside my own head? How do I transform my own heart? So that book is a lot about that. Then my second book, and we had a really fun launch interview for that book, Their Faces Shown, is about our experience as foster parents. So we had a foster daughter with us for about a year, and like everything in life, it was really a spiritual journey as much as anything else. I mean, it was the subtitle is Lessons on Loving and Letting Go. So it was really about loving and letting go. She left our house, and there was a lot of grief around that, and of course a lot of growth. So those were my first two books.
Yeah, that was a really fun interview, and I give you a lot of credit for the courage to write about things like that involve not just you, but your spouse, right? So I mean, that's really wonderful that you were able to accomplish those things.
Well, David's been really generous to let me write about our journey. He's the hero of the story.
So now let's talk about the new book. So how did that come about? What led up to Reclaiming Rest?
Yeah, so it's kind of it's sort of I think it's kind of a funny story. Like, so I'm this new Christian. Well, actually the story begins before I was baptized. So I became exposed to Sabbath keeping as a spiritual practice when I was still kind of in an exploration mode. And Wayne Mueller's book, Sabbath, which is great, really inspired me. And so kind of on my own, I started to develop a weekly Sabbath practice because I was struggling, like many people, with stress and overwhelm and how to balance it all, and really wanting to live differently. And so I started having a Sabbath practice, but I felt lonely. I didn't know how to do it. I'm not Jewish, so I didn't have the kind of like, that culture and guidance and, community backing me up. So I was really hungry for community in my Sabbath keeping, because partly I wanted accountability and permission and help. It's hard to do something that's against the grain. And a lot of my colleagues are on email, responding to emails at all times of, nights, weekends, vacations. And so I need role models, so I was looking for that. And then I became a Christian, and that's a whole nother story, which again, I told in Following the Red Bird. And so perhaps naively, I got to church thinking, great, I didn't become a Christian for Sabbath keeping, but now that I am, like, here I am, let's all do this. And then I was really surprised that Sabbath keeping has really gone out of fashion, at least in a lot of mainline Protestant churches. And that's what the data show as well. So I write in the book, like, I didn't think I was naive going in, and about many, many, many things I wasn't naive, but this area I was. So a lot of it actually was, and I think this surprises people, but I felt an incredible sense of like grief and disappointment, because again, I want help living differently. Like, I think one of the beauties of church, and we don't often think of it this way, is that church helps us have a really different worldview. Like it helps us orient ourselves to different values, different vision, different purpose. And so I wanted part of that as to be around rest. And so that was kind of like what started the whole thing, was that sort of like hunger and sadness and disappointment. I would say, thankfully, it's evolved, but I'm laughing because it took me researching and writing a whole book about rest to finally, now I have a really committed weekly Sabbath practice. And I found a lot of community in it. I have what I call in the book, I have a Sabbath buddy. So somebody at church and we found each other, and that's been really supportive. But also just really understanding the theology of Sabbath has been really helpful, because actually, Brian, what it's done for me is it's just been this whole window into better understanding Christian theology. Because really, for me, it's about why do we work and why do we rest? And that's kind of like, that means like, what are we doing in the world, right? And so the theology, as I've dug into the theology, it really has helped me challenge my existing answers to those questions and then sort of go deeper into my faith life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But, it's just kind of interesting between, our different personalities, because and in the past, I've asked myself before, it's like, why do we need to sleep? Whose idea was it, that we had to spend half the time, whatever, sleeping?
Right.
We could just be awake and productive, getting things done all those hours. Why do we need to sleep? So.
Right. Well, no, you're not actually alone. I did a lot of research and reading about sleep and rest for this book. And there have been, I think it was, there's some, I'll send you an article. There've been these like preeminent leaders who have asked that same question and who have tried to like wean themselves off of sleep because they're like, this is a waste of time. So,
well, I know better than to try that. I'm not an advocate of it because that's stupid. Right. But it just begs the question of like, whose idea was this?
Well, and I think it's also interesting because there's a lot of people who sort of like feed into this sort of self-care, that self-care is really important. And again, the way I open the book is I actually quote Lauren Winner's book, Mudhouse Sabbath, by saying, that the world is full of messages about take care, treat yourself to an extra long bubble bath, treat yourself to a glass of Chardonnay, and then I end the chapter by saying, like, we are restless people. We need more than extra long bubble bath. We need deeper answers to what the meaning of work is and what the meaning of rest is. So.
So another concept that you go into in the book that I hadn't thought about this angle before is that, rest as a social justice issue. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's so many kind of sides of that. So, I think first of all, the biggest one is who can afford to rest and who has the right to rest. I was, writing this book in the middle of the pandemic, and I was also writing the book while we were kind of through this national and international reckoning with violent white supremacy following the death of George Floyd and other Black Americans. So there's just, it was obviously this has been a time of reflection and for many of us. So I think just at its most basic level, who can afford to rest? One of the biggest challenges pushbacks I've gotten from other Christians around Sabbath keeping is this idea of, well, it may be elitist, not like there are shift workers, there are low wage workers, it's great that you as a more privileged person can afford to take a rest, but not everybody can. And I think that that's absolutely right. And one of the main theologies of the Sabbath and Exodus is that it's intended for everyone. It's intended for, owner and servant, man and woman, animal and human. And so actually there's a tremendous scholarship around how, Sabbath keeping is a call to egalitarianism. And so we need to remember that as so rather than sort of abandoning Sabbath keeping, I think what we can say is that's right. There's something deeply wrong with our society if not everyone can afford to rest. And so as we think about things like minimum wage, we can actually bring a Sabbath ethic to those policy discussions, which I think resonates with some of the work you're doing with your new book. And there's a history of that. Look at the labor laws in the United States. Yeah. A lot of those prisoner debts. A lot of these kind of historical movements have actually been formed by a Sabbath ethic. So so that we have that to build on. And I think we need to be bringing that into the conversation. But even more than that, so I became familiar with the work of Tricia Hersey, who calls herself the Nap Bishop, and she's doing amazing work. And she really talks about rest as resistance, and that particularly a lot of people of color really, there's this kind of this intersection of white supremacy and capitalism, and that, of course, with the legacy of slavery, when, bodies were not allowed to rest, that really part of the pushback and the reparations and the reclamation is around reclaiming rest. So her work is incredibly powerful. I highly encourage folks to check her work out. So there's a lot of elements, but I think then for me, and maybe I can talk a little bit more about this, again, I identify as someone who wants to make the world a better place. I think like you, Brian, and I think there's, a question of like, so what is the Christian answer to what our job is vis-a-vis God's job? Who's going to save the world? Is it us or God? And so for me, that's what I mean, that the theology of that, really digging into the theology of Sabbath keeping helped me look at that question more closely. Does that make sense?
Very cool. Yeah, absolutely. So, in addition to kind of the why around, rest, you also talk about, kind of the how and the when, and so what does your personal, Sabbath practice look like now?
Yeah, so it's been, again, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, one of the biggest blessings. It's sort of like, I think God has a funny sense of humor that I had to like research and write this whole book about rest to have a weekly cadence of rest. But well, first of all, that's a good point. I mean, I think that we need to think about the daily, the weekly, the sort of monthly or quarterly, and then the kind of lifetime rhythm of rest. So for me, I have a daily prayer practice. So that's kind of where I really try to rest in God on a daily basis. Then I have my weekly Sabbath practice, which I'll tell you more about. Part of what I did in the book was I took intentional 36-hour retreats for once a month. And so then that's kind of the monthly, or you could do that quarterly. And then also thinking about sort of the lifetime. And even just, I've been talking recently with friends and colleagues about sort of what the meaning of rest means when you're retired, like that's a whole different sort of when you're kind of perhaps the sort of core vocational work is done, or you move into a second vocation. So I think it's really important to be talking about this, both kind of in those chunks of time, but also over the life course. But in terms of my weekly practice, one thing that I really, really struggled with is very practical. So everyone that I work with is generally offline on Saturdays, but then they start to get back online Sunday afternoons and nights. So there's incredible pressure. There's a great Wall Street Journal article that's titled Sunday nights are the new Monday, and workers are miserable. So I feel that as like there's pressure to check in and on Sunday afternoon or night. And those, boundaries between work and home life are getting increasingly eroded. So I would try really hard I wanted to be a good Christian and do it with everybody else, even though, again, not a lot of people were observing the Sabbath on Sundays. I at least wanted to be in community with people. But actually what I ended up really exploring in the book was sort of the theology of Holy Saturday. We talk about Good Friday and we talk about Easter, but what happened on Holy Saturday? That's when Jesus rested on the tomb, and that was actually the Jewish Sabbath that they were observing. And so then we celebrate Easter we celebrate every Sunday, the Lord's Day, as a little Easter. So now kind of I have an intersection of kind of the practical and the theological, and I observe my Sabbath on Saturday, again, because of those two intersections. And then I think about Sunday as the Lord's Day. I worship on Sunday morning, go to church. It's been online the last year, but we had our first in-person meeting this Sunday. It was great. And then I try to start my work week. I start to then get back into work on Sunday afternoon. I might do chores or go grocery shopping or check my work email. But I try to bring what one author calls a resurrection mindset. I try to rest and then worship, and then I'm re-entering my work with a different mindset, hopefully. So that's been really great. And again, it's a kind of intersection of what's practical and sort of my theological exploration, which is perhaps a bit quirky, but it's been really helpful. And I have to say it's been really restorative. I think that's, Brian, I work hard. So it's been really helpful to have a practice of restorative rest.
Yeah, you and I both, have some personality traits in common like that, don't we? So what do you suggest for other folks, for them to think about this, and, how can you both work hard and rest hard?
Yeah, so I will say here's the book again, and our friend Kathy Izzard was one of my early reviewers, and she had a great suggestion. She was like, people need practical suggestions. So based on the suggestion that Kathy made, I added a quick start guide to Sabbath.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, so in there, one of the suggestions I make is to really think about like what counts as work for you, like for everyone. Work means different things to different people, right? If you're a stay-at-home parent, or if you are a full-time worker, or if you're retired, or if you're a student, or if you're unemployed. One of the people I spoke to while I was writing the book he said, when I was unemployed and looking for work, I felt like I did not deserve to rest,
Wow.
And that just gets at that Sabbath is a gift from God. Sabbath is not something we earn, just like all the other gifts from God. We don't earn them, we receive them. So just like that, the gift of rest is a gift from God. And so, to really be thinking about like what counts as work for you. So if you're doing manual labor for your day job or for your work, or if you're a stay-at-home parent and you're, taking care of kids and doing laundry, and, or if you're like me, you spend a lot of your time on your computer, kind of what you're going to abstain from while you're resting is going to look different. So I would say that's the first step I would advise people, is to really think about like what counts as work for you.
Very, very smart to be intentional about that question. So we're recording this in early June 2021, kind of as the country is emerging from the pandemic. How does rest fit into the kind of build back better view of the world?
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, that phrase has a little bit become commonplace now, but when I was writing the book, really that phrase, build back better, it comes from the humanitarian sector. And so my public health colleagues and donors, I first heard that from that sector, that when there's a humanitarian crisis, you're often talking about how you can build back better post-crisis. So I think a lot of us globally have been thinking about the implications for that for the pandemic. So, I mean, I don't know about you, Brian, but I think the silver lining that I heard a lot of people talking about was that when we were, quarantining at home, there was so much grief, so much trauma, so much loss for people, and there were, for some, not all, some silver linings, perhaps of spending more time with family, of perhaps, being less compulsively busy. And so I do think that as we re-enter kind of, as in the US, of course, the pandemic rages on in many settings around the globe. But as in the US, things start to open up more, I think it's really a time for us to be reflective of how we spend our time, how we spend our energy. There's a great article I was just recommending, and it was published in the Harvard Business Review, called "Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time." We often think about managing our time, but like, how do we really, be intentional about our not just, again, our how, our why, and our when of rest as we move back into sort of a post-pandemic lifestyle.
I like that idea of managing your energy. Just there are obviously things that we need to really focus on, right? And focus on energy.
And I think it also goes back to your earlier question about social justice. I mean, this is a time, again, to be thinking about, we're so focused, rightly so, on the health inequities and in the United States and globally that the pandemic has really laid bare. I think we're also really it's been a wake-up call for some of the stresses that working parents have been facing during the pandemic. So, these issues of how do we work, how do we rest, how do we address equity in those issues are, again, that's the heart of so much of the public policy issues that we're struggling with. And so I would, again, encourage us to bring a Sabbath ethic to those conversations.
So knowing that you've been so involved in writing for your life, in various ways for the last couple of years, I have to ask you the question of, in terms of learning, in terms of the networking, in terms of, all the different aspects of what we do, how can you say that's most helped you?
Yeah, well, I really just am so, as you know, Brian, so grateful for Writing for Your Life. It's been an incredible community. And I mean, for one thing, there's that cheesy saying like finding your tribe. And I have to say I hope that we can get back to being in person, because it was at the Raleigh conference when you and I first met, and I looked around, and for the first time in my life, I think that phrase came to my head. I thought to myself, I've really found my tribe. And that's a gift. So I thank you for that. And obviously you and the content, the resources you're offering have really helped me in my journey, because as I mentioned earlier, if you're a new writer, an emerging writer, it's confusing how to build a platform. And I think, I've struggled even with that word, how to build a platform. And I think a lot of writers do. Like, we love writing, but marketing is both intimidating and can feel unsavory. So actually, I'll give a shout out. Brian and I have just had a session accepted for the Wild Goose Festival that will happen over Labor Day weekend this year. And we're going to co-lead a session called Marketing as a Spiritual Practice. So really, I think that's, for me, nails it. It's like, for me, writing is a deeply spiritual practice, but now, marketing sounds like a dirty word. And I think you've really helped me, Brian, challenge some of those assumptions, so that I don't think of it that way. I think of it as reaching writers who will be hopefully interested in reading my words. And that's a totally different mindset than, something unsavory. So
Good. That's wonderful.
I'm growing. Hopefully I'm growing.
Well, I'm such a big believer in, okay, why are we doing all this writing stuff and publishing stuff in the first place? And the main thing is to try to help other people.
Right.
So, if marketing or whatever else is a means to that end, it can be used very, very positively. So that's the way I try to think of it anyway.
Getting the word out.
Yeah. So, I don't want to ask you to divulge anything that you don't want to talk about yet, but, I got to believe you've got some thoughts and plans about work beyond the first 3 books. Is there anything you can talk about?
Well, I'm starting to put some pen to paper about a new concept, so we'll see. I think it's a little early to be talking about it, but it's been so fun to work with Broadleaf Books on this project. And you and I have talked about Broadleaf Books as the publisher here.
Absolutely. I've got a lot of respect for them and the work that they've done. And I'm so glad you're working with them.
Yeah. They're a new imprint. They really, I think, are supporting also a lot of progressive voices. And so they've been awesome to work with. So stay tuned for potential future projects, and I'll keep you posted, of course. But, I just really, again, I always feel sort of surprised that I've been called in this direction. I wasn't expecting it. But some of your own story, Brian, it's like we find we get called and to things we were not expecting, and they're, amazing blessings.
Sure. That's for sure. And maybe we can noodle on this whole marketing as a spiritual practice thing. And maybe I don't know if there's a co-authoring opportunity to do a book together or not, but anyway, we can brainstorm.
I think people are hungry for that, because I know for me, again, I'm just so struck by Jesus's words, like, I came here to serve, not to be served. And so I think I'm really, that's what I want to avoid in myself, is any, sort of that, like, being self-serving. So how do we stay kind of focused on the service aspect of our writing, and then our kind of publishing and getting the word out through marketing?
Awesome. I love it. Well, Kate, congratulations on this new book. I mean, I know how much work it took for you to, for anyone to pull together a serious book. And you've done that, and Broadleaf is publishing it, and that's all a wonderful thing. So, I want to congratulate you on that. Thanks for, sharing it with us. And, best of luck with the launch of this, both short term and beyond.
Thank you. It's been a blessing. It was to write a book about rest while I was working full time during a global pandemic was, I think God definitely has a sense of humor. But it's been great. And I, again, just really thank you. And Brian, not just for, and I'll give a shout out too before we close. So in addition, of course, to your Writing for Your Life, you also are the host of Compassionate Christianity. And just a reminder to folks, if they're not familiar, that on the Compassionate Christianity site, there's a curated list of resources related to Sabbath keeping that I worked with Brian on. So you can check that out too. That's a great resource, hopefully.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for mentioning that. Well, Kate, thanks again so much for joining us. And, we'll watch with, great anticipation as
Great.
the book launches.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you.
Take care.